If you're interested in decoding the complexities of China's national security outlook and its military modernization, check out Takshashila's latest expert capsule course offering China's defense in the new era. Visit school.takshashila.org.in and enroll in the course today.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Greetings and welcome to All Things Policy podcast of the Takshashila Institution. I am Abhishek, a research analyst with the Indo-Pacific Studies program studying the US, and today I am joined by Brigadier Anil Raman, a research fellow with the Indo-Pacific Studies program studying the US domestic politics. Today we will be discussing how the Trump administration's approach towards domestic use of military and law enforcement agencies is a sign of democratic backsliding. Welcome, Brigadier Raman. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Let us start by discussing the address by Secretary of War Pete Hegseth to the military earlier this month. You have discussed this in our newsletter, the DC Dossier, more in detail. But for our audience here, what are the more worrying signs from this address that hint at changes in civil-military relations in the US and larger potential for democratic backsliding?
You see, historically, the United States followed the Samuel Huntington's objective control model, which was outlined in his 1957 book, The Soldier and the State. Now, this model of civil-military relations emphasizes a professional, apolitical military, which is subordinate to the elected civilian leaders who formulate policy. The military, meanwhile, retains autonomy over operational and tactical execution. This model was seen as the ideal internationally, including by India. Correspondingly, the United States military has rarely been employed on home soil during political crises. President Trump has overturned both these norms when assuming office. For decades, American politicians avoided interference in the military's internal culture, preferring to uphold objective control. The military was encouraged to be strictly meritocratic, apolitical, secular, and inclusive of diversity. Both promotions and the removals of senior officers for political, social, and cultural beliefs were unheard of. The current administration has changed this approach entirely. This is because the Trump's Make America Great Again political base feels that the military has gone soft, it has gone woke, and it has gone globalist. Diversity, that is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion policies are considered to be inherently anti-merit and dangerous to operational efficiency. Now, while can be extremely largely contested, the political base has been made to feel that these things are critical issues. Hence, we have seen President Donald Trump and the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, they have purged many senior officers from the US military within months of taking over. Some of those included General Peter Brown, who is only the second black officer to hold the highest military appointment of Chief of Joint Staff. In other words, your primary military advisor, the senior most military officer in your entire military, was removed or encouraged to resign. So that was the policy and the attitude of Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth towards the military. Then you had female heads of the Coast of Guard and Chief of Naval Operations who were removed. Transgender and binary individuals have been disqualified from serving. The head of Cyber Command, General Timothy Ho, was sacked after his loyalty was questioned by a MAGA influencer who was close to the president. That is, it was not even any formal organization or institution like the Congress or any other politician. It was an influencer who has displayed a lot of loyalty to the president. She managed to convince the president to dismiss her, the head of one of the most important commands of the US military. Now, when this address took place of nearly 800 Senior most military officers who were flown in from all over the world to Quantico, the base. There, Trump and the defense secretary addressed them, and the contents of the address were highly controversial. The defense secretary announced his 10 directives that included denunciation of politically correct leadership and threatened further leadership purges. He announced major policy shifts like raising physical standards, removing DEI initiatives, loosening oversight and whistleblower channels, because there was a sentiment that, the military had gone soft and was protecting people who were complaining about the hierarchy. He wanted to end that. But what was most controversial was both he and the president, who spoke later, they emphasized loyalty to the regime. Hesitation was framed as disloyalty by Hegseth, and Trump spoke about dealing with the enemy within. He threatened to fire generals he doesn't like. And Trump joked about using Democrat run dangerous cities for live firing practice. This charged rhetoric, insisting on loyalty to the regime, is characteristics of totalitarian leaders. Terming the opposition as the enemy is a direct assault on the American military's neutrality and the foundations of civil military relations. And of course, it severely damages democracy.
So if we look at the core point you mentioned about them sacking a lot of military brass, we have also seen a phenomena where a lot of military brass are just voluntarily leaving, or are critical of the speech and the general approach of Pete Hegseth towards the department, right? What are the major complaints coming from the military brass's side? What is it that they are saying that is scary or very threatening to American democracy coming from Pete Hegseth and the second Trump administration?
The worries of the military brass were expressed in an article in the Washington Times. Now, why I'm highlighting this particular media is otherwise Washington Times is known to be a very hardcore pro-Trump, pro-MAGA media publication. So if that publication has, chose to air is what has been chosen to air the grievances of the military, one can understand how deep the concern is. I think most majorly their concern is that the president may make them undertake tasks which they are not legally bound to do. For example, one of the examples one can see is that Admiral Alvin Halsey, who was the chief of the US military Southern Command, resigned or offered to resign about 7 days ago, or rather his resignation has been announced. He will leave office only in December. Now, he was the officer who was in charge of the Southern Command, which was spearheading the anti-drug strikes on the speedboats in the Caribbean Sea along the Venezuelan coast. And he was also would have been responsible for undertaking the military operation, which seems to be building up in the same area. President Donald Trump has, amassed a huge military buildup in the area. Now, there have been a lot of questions whether these strikes are legal. And it appears that the admiral, who is a 4-star general of the US Navy, is not comfortable about this decision. And it appears that, resigning 1 year into his 3-year tenure is an indication of the discomfort of senior military officers with some of the policies. A second issue is that they had this, again, a very important issue is this insistence of loyalty, personal loyalty to the president and to the regime actually is contrary to the norms or the rules of the army, which demands loyalty to the constitution. So by insisting on loyalty to the administration, the president is in fact crossing a big line. Thirdly, I think some of the directions and some of the requirements which the defense secretary has stated, it appeared to the senior officers in the military that these are, more in sort of keeping with the wish list of an ex-junior officer would have, rather than anything serious. So what it does is it leads to a loss of respect for the institution of the defense secretary. If the US military loses respect for the defense secretary and is not entirely, happy about the legality of what the president is doing, then that does not speak for a healthy situation.
So, a quick segue from democratic backsliding point of view, because I found this very interesting. Today, we see that U.S. military is expected to be involved in a lot of active conflicts, at least officially declared, be it's Israel's Palestinian peacekeeping troops and that kind of thing, or larger role in potential military conflicts that might come about in very near future, right? So, if you look at it from this perspective, do you think it will impact the operational standards of the U.S. military in some way?
The operational standards would immediately, if you ask my opinion, they would not be impacted because they are isolated from the larger political, battles which are being undertaken by their superiors. And these are all battles, which are happening at the four-star and the Pentagon level. These are not really aspects which, reach down to the formations, the divisions and the tactical level. They keep training and doing their jobs for their particular tasks. But yes, ultimately, for example, if the US military now gets employed in Venezuela and it has to undertake a prolonged sort of counter guerrilla campaign there against the forces of, President Maduro once he's overthrown, then these questions will, start coming up as to, what are they doing there? And like a lot of American soldiers had questions about what they were doing in Iraq and what they were doing in Afghanistan after a certain period of time. So in that way, the legality will, what the president is doing will come. But that is at a certain stage. I don't think initially or at this stage, their operational efficiency, at the tip of the spear level would be affected in any way.
All right. So next, if we discuss of use of force in general and not military in particular, how about the recent deployment of National Guard or, using the deployment of National Guard as a threat to, get his political means by the president, which is also driven by, law and order conditions and also citizens using their rights to protest and demonstrate against the actions of federal agencies like ICE. So what are your thoughts on that?
The Trump's domestic employment of the military is, to my mind, far more worrisome in the short term. He has employed what is known as the Federalized National Guard from Republican states such as Texas and Virginia and deployed them in Democratic cities such as Chicago, Washington, D.C., and Portland. Firstly, just a word on the National Guard. What exactly is the U.S. National Guard? The U.S. National Guard, for Indian listeners, you can think of it as a sort of cross between the territorial army and the state armed police. The states in the US do not have armed police battalions in the technical sense that we do. Some of the largest states have their own larger police forces, such as the Texas Rangers, but the vast majority of the states rely on their National Guard units, which belong to that state. The soldiers belong to that particular state, and they can be called upon by the state governor to undertake law enforcement activities within the state. You also have Air Force National Guard units in addition to Army National Guard units. The personnel of these National Guard units may either be recruited directly from the civil population or they may be ex-military personnel. They all have to go through training or refresher training, and they may even be deployed abroad, as has been the case in Iraq and in Afghanistan. Another feature is the president may, in exceptional cases, federalize the National Guard. In other words, for use for federal employment, central employment. And this, of course, is done with the approval of the Congress. There has been very little precedent of, using National Guard from the red states, that is from a particular state, and then using it to combat crime or using it for any manner in a Democrat ruled state, which is what now President Trump is doing. And this is being done in blatant disregard and without consultation with the governors and the governments of the state to which these guard units are being deployed to. In other words, neither Oregon nor California or Illinois has
Or DC.
requested, or Washington DC wanted National Guard to be there because in their opinion there was no law and order issue. But President Trump mobilized the National Guard from red states like Virginia and Texas and had them deployed in blue states, which represents a very, very flagrant violation of the spirit of an act called the Comic Actus Act. Now, this particular act, it is called the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. This law prohibits the military, including the Federalized National Guard, from undertaking police actions unless explicitly authorized by the Congress. Now, he has invoked Section 12406 of Title 10 to deploy the National Guard, which allows the president to federalize the National Guard in case of extreme situations like invasion, rebellion, or inability to enforce law. But by skating through the scope of the act and by bending legality, President Trump has deployed, despite there being opposition even from, violating even the orders of the judges. So, in sum, we can say that he's using the military against domestic political opposition in the worst possible manner. Now, here, Abhishek, I know you have been following the deployment of the ICE. So, could you elaborate on that?
So I think deployment of ICE is something very similar to this as well, right? Because it comes under legally gray zone. It also comes under some kind of scrutiny that is extremely bipartisan as well, right? So if you look at ICE, today's rates, ICE has existed since 9/11 and has been a very active agency against immigration and part of US war on terror and that kind of thing. But if you look at what's happening today, the ICE's mandate has been expanded. It's there's a strong push to expand the overall personnel within ICE as well, right? If you look at this, for example, one biggest symptom towards this direction is, the president setting up a target of 1 million annual deportations to ICE, which is extremely unprecedented target because the highest number of arrests or deportations that ICE has made previously was around 2012. That was roughly around 400,000 deportations. Because the target of 1 million has been actively seen as an unrealistic target. You can't have 1 million illegal immigrants who are also, actively involved in crime in the US. Because if that was the case in reality, the US society would not be what it is today. It would be far more unstable than what it looks like today, right? And to put up that target as an annual rate of deportation is unrealistic and it will lead to excesses in the long term. But another angle to look at it is also the way Trump administration is pushing this further, because Trump administration has boasted a lot of things during their campaigns or during their speeches and in its agendas. But it is very specific, very dangerous instances only where Trump administration has actively done something to, further their agendas. For ICE, for example, they have set up a target of 1 million and they know the two major issues that ICE will be facing in executing this kind of thing is not only obviously the legal definition of what can be considered as, an illegal criminal immigrant, but also the number of personnel that ICE has, which is around 5,000, and also the kind of funding that ICE used to get back in the day. So to counter that, what the Trump administration has done is in July, they passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. In that, they have increased the funding for ICE operations to about $75 billion. And with that, they have also set up an annual target of recruiting 10,000 ICE agents, expanding ICE to a 10,000 agents force. And they have obviously reserved a lot of these recruitments for people from, armed forces or policing background. But a majority of these people are also hard to recruit. And this is leading to a situation where ICE, the ICE standards of recruitment are being lowered. This is in turn, resulting in more, acts which are outside the purview of law, or which might be considered, contested or gray zone activities, right? And if you look at the activities in particular and the protests about them from, both parties, which call them, bipartisan, we have firstly the opposition from the Democratic Party who are looking at it from a democratic or a humanitarian perspective, wherein they believe that, human beings should not be deported in such violent ways. And it also has something to do with their voter base that largely comes from the migrants who have, been citizens of the US and that kind of thing. But if we look at the more interesting criticism coming against ICE, this comes from the Republican Party or the traditional conservative, constitutional legalist base of the Republican Party, who argue firstly that, the role of ICE in itself and their arrests and their deporting process, this entire process is beyond the due process that is required by law for people to prosecute and deport people. It is going beyond that particular thing. They are sometimes moving beyond the judge sentences and arresting people and taking them away. Due process is not followed in multiple instances, and in several instances the court judgments have come after the deportation has taken place. And a lot of these people are deported to areas which are not their home countries, which are foreign prisons, which benefit, again, the corporate interests of a lot of the MAGA funders. Then another angle is also which discusses gray zone is use of force. So the mandate given to ICE is two. First is investigation of, in law and enforcement and the customs regulation. Second is to actually conduct a law and order related procedure of arresting people or detaining them in that sense with proper, obviously, legal process backing it. But ICE agents are actively seen using force against not only the people they're trying to arrest, but also the protesters who are protesting against them, who are proper US citizens. They are also seen using, using force against the journalists who are part of this, and it has expanded the kind of mandate that ICE has been given. So this is also is something that is being seen as extremely dangerous by both parties, and is also becoming a symptom of democratic backsliding that way.
So where do you think the ICE operations are going to go from now? Are they going to intensify, or with all the protests which are coming against them, do you think that there's any chance that they may reduce in shape or form?
So I don't think ICE operations will be reduced, especially in terms of rhetoric. And so if you look at support base for ICE operations, that is arresting illegal immigrants with a broad definition of illegal immigrants, comes from and has a very strong support from the rural base, which also involves a lot of MAGA crowd, right? And the major ICE operations that are taking place and the resistance to them from public is coming in the urban areas, be it cities like New York, New Jersey, be it, or even Chicago recently, right? So most of these cities have that kind of urban population, and it also shows that rural-urban kind of divide. And obviously, a lot of illegal migrants or undocumented migrants also live in cities rather than rural areas. So that is one angle that this can be used for. And if you look at how ICE raids are being supported, when there is massive protests against ICE raid, there have been obviously threats of using National Guard and that kind of thing, right? So if that kind of threat consistently looms, it gives ICE some kind of power in that sense. But I think coming midterms, the Trump administration will sort to get into the midterms with some kind of positive image surrounding it. So it might see a major dip in its use of ICE, or, boasting about the use of ICE and that kind of thing.
So that was a really interesting, talk about ICE and, of course, the US military. And what we are witnessing actually is the improper, illegal, and in some ways, an extremely cruel employment of, armed force, both of the military and of others. And it's being used to trample the rights of the US citizens, as well as it damages the standing of the United States in the world. So the next time the US goes and tries to promote, democracy or human rights, other countries will look at it with a lot of skepticism.
Thank you so much, Brigadier Raman, for joining us. It has been a really, I think, enlightening conversation in that sense for both me and for our listeners. And thank you once again for all the listeners for joining in this podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.